Jake Morrison sat in the back row of the huge classroom and tried not to stare at his classmates. 3 months at the Galactic Institute, and he still couldn't get used to sharing a room with aliens. Real aliens with tentacles and scales and eyes, in places where eyes definitely should not be. The classroom itself was bigger than his entire high school back in Ohio. Tall windows showed the purple sky of Kepler 7, where 2 orange suns hung like old basketballs. The desks were all different sizes and shapes to fit different body types. Jake's human desk looked tiny next to the massive stone platform where Crush of Mountains sat. The rocky alien was 12 feet tall and looked like a walking boulder with arms. Professor Zelthak clicked his way to the front of the room on 6 thin legs. The insect-like alien had been teaching galactic history for over 200 years. His 4 compound eyes could look in different directions at once, which made Jake nervous. You never knew if the professor was watching you or not. Today we begin your final project, Professor Zelthak said. His voice buzzed like an angry bee. You will write a complete essay on the rise and fall of galactic civilizations throughout history. Jake heard groans around the room. Even alien. Teenagers hated big assignments. This essay will count for half your grade, the professor continued. You have 4 weeks. I expect deep research and original thinking. No copying from the standard databases. Zekthon, the purple-skinned prince from Vorthak Prime, raised one of his 4 arms. Professor, surely you don't expect us to find anything new. Everything about galactic history has been studied for thousands of years. Professor Zelthak's antennae twitched. That attitude, Prince Zekthon, is exactly why most students fail this assignment. True understanding requires fresh eyes and new questions. Jake wrote down the assignment details in his notebook. Back on Earth, his grandmother Betty had always told him that history was more than just dates and names. History is about people making choices, she used to say while they worked in her garden. Good choices, bad choices, and choices that seemed good at the time but turned out terrible later. The essay must be at least 10,000 words, Professor Zelthak announced. More groans filled the room. You must examine at least 5 different civilizations and explain why they rose to power and why they fell, shard of infinite thought. The crystalline being from Xerion chimed like wind bells. Professor, the patterns are well known. Resource depletion, technological stagnation, political corruption. These are the primary factors in civilizational collapse. Are they? Professor, Zelthak asked. How do you know? Have you studied the primary sources? Have you looked beyond the approved textbooks? Jake raised his hand. The professor's upper 2 eyes turned toward him while the lower 2 kept scanning the rest of the class. Yes, Mr. Morrison. What if we interview people who lived through these events? Like old people from different species? The class fell silent. Several aliens turned to stare at Jake with expressions he couldn't read. Did they think he was stupid? Interesting suggestion, Professor Zelthak said slowly. Personal accounts can provide valuable perspective, though they must be balanced against documented facts. Zekthon laughed, a sound like breaking glass. The human wants to listen to old stories instead of studying real history. How primitive. Jake felt his face get hot. Stories are part of history. My grandmother always said that official records only tell you what the government wanted people to believe. Your grandmother was just a human teacher on a backwater planet, Zekthon said. What could she possibly know about galactic civilization? She knew about people, Jake shot back. And civilizations are made of people. Professor Zelthak clicked, his mandibles together. Enough. Both approaches have merit. Prince Zekthon, official records are important but not complete. Mr. Morrison, personal accounts are valuable but can be biased. Good historians use all available sources. The professor moved to the large screen at the front of the room. Images of great cities and star fleets appeared. The Andromedan Empire lasted 3,000 years. The Centauri coalition controlled a quarter of the galaxy. The crystal mines built computers the size of moons, all of them fell. Your job is to explain why. Jake looked at the images and thought about his grandmother's stories. She had told him about the Roman Empire and how it got too big to control, She had explained how the British Empire fell apart after 2 world wars. She had described how America had gone from 13 small colonies to a world power in just 200 years. Pattern recognition, she had called it. History doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. The bell chimed, signaling the end of class. Students began gathering their things and talking in dozens of different languages. Jake packed his notebook slowly, thinking. "Mr. Morrison," Professor Zelthak called out. "A moment, please." Jake walked to the front of the room. Up close, the professor was even more intimidating. His compound eyes reflected the light like black mirrors. "You are the first human student we have had in this advanced class," the professor said. "Your species is still new to galactic society. Some faculty members questioned whether you were ready for graduate-level coursework." Jake swallowed hard. "Am I failing?" "On the contrary, your questions today were more thoughtful than most students ask in an entire semester." The professor's antennae twitched again. "Your species has a reputation for unusual thinking. Perhaps that will serve you well in this assignment." "What do you mean?" Professor Zelthak was quiet for a long moment. "Every galactic civilization believes it has reached the peak of development. They think they have solved all the important problems, but then they fall, just like all the others. Perhaps someone from outside our established patterns might see what we cannot." Jake left the classroom with his head spinning. He had thought this would be just another history assignment. Write about some dead civilizations, analyze their mistakes, get a grade. But Professor Zelthak seemed to expect something more. That night in his small dorm room, Jake video called his grandmother on Earth. Her wrinkled face appeared on the screen, and she smiled when she saw him. "How's my favorite galactic scholar?" she asked. Jake told her about the assignment and Professor Zelthak's strange comments. Betty listened carefully, nodding as he spoke. "Sounds like your professor wants you to think, not just memorize," she said. "What's your gut feeling about these fallen civilizations?" Jake thought about the images he had seen. Great cities, powerful armies, advanced technology. All gone now. "I don't know yet," he said. "But I have this feeling that the official explanations are missing something important." Betty smiled. "Then you're asking the right questions. Remember what I taught you about history. It's about people making choices." "That's right. And sometimes the most important choices are the ones people don't even realize they're making." After the call ended, Jake sat at his desk and opened his notebook. At the top of a fresh page, he wrote, "Why do great civilizations fall?" Below that, he added, "What choices did they make without knowing they were making them?" He didn't know it yet, but those questions would change everything. Jake spent the next 3 days in the Institute's massive library. The building was 15 stories tall and held information from across the galaxy. Most students just used the computer terminals to access the standard databases. Jake started there too, reading the official histories of fallen civilizations. The Andromedan Empire had ruled for 3,000 years before collapsing from resource shortages. The Centauri coalition fell apart due to political corruption. The crystal mines destroyed themselves through technological accidents. Every textbook said the same things, but Jake remembered his grandmother's words about official records. On the 4th day, he decided to dig deeper. The human database section was small and tucked away in a corner of the 3rd floor. Most alien. Students ignored it completely. Jake found terminals that could access Earth's historical records, including thousands of documentaries, books, and personal accounts that his grandmother had told him about. He started with Rome. The official galactic databases said the Roman Empire fell because of barbarian invasions and economic problems, but the human sources told a different story. Rome had become comfortable. The citizens stopped joining the army because life was easy. The government gave away free food and entertainment to keep people happy. The ruling class cared more about luxury than governing. Jake wrote notes comparing Rome to the Andromedan Empire. The similarities were strange. Both had lasted about the same amount of time. Both had citizens who stopped caring about their duties. Both had leaders who focused on comfort instead of challenges. Interesting reading. Jake looked up to see Dr. Lisa Parker, the human cultural attaché. She was in her 40s with gray hair and kind eyes. She had been helpful when Jake first arrived at the institute. "Hi, Dr. Parker, I'm working on a history assignment." She sat down next to him. "Mind if I take a look?" Jake showed her his notes comparing different civilizations. Dr. Parker read quietly for several minutes. "This is graduate-level work, Jake. What made you think to compare these societies?" "My grandmother taught me that history has patterns. She said successful civilizations often make the same mistakes." Dr. Parker nodded slowly. "Your grandmother sounds like a smart woman. Have you found any other patterns?" Jake pulled out more notes. Every fallen civilization did the same thing. They eliminated competition, avoided conflict, and tried to make everything perfect and safe. "And you think that was a mistake?" "I think it made them weak." Jake hesitated, then continued. "Dr. Parker, do you think the current galactic government is making the same mistakes?" Dr. Parker was quiet for a long time. Finally, she said, "That's a very dangerous question to ask, Jake. But is it the right question?" "Maybe. But be careful who you ask it to." The next week, Jake started interviewing elderly beings from different species. Dr. Parker helped him find volunteers who were willing to talk. Most of the aliens were curious about the young human student who wanted to hear their stories. An old Vorthak general named Kethmar told Jake about the last days of the Centauri Coalition. "The government spent more time writing reports than making decisions," the general said through his translator. "Every choice had to be approved by 17 different committees. By the time they decided what to do, the crisis was already over." Ancient crystalline entity called Harmony of Ages shared memories of the crystal mine's final years. "We became so afraid of making mistakes that we stopped taking risks. We built machines to make all our decisions for us. When the machines failed, we had forgotten how to think for ourselves." Jake interviewed dozens of elderly beings. Their stories were all different, but the pattern was always the same. Great civilizations became comfortable, then careful, then paralyzed by their own success. One evening, Jake was working late in the library when Prince Zekthon found him. "Still playing with your old stories, human?" the prince asked. "I'm doing research," Jake said without looking up. "Research into fairy tales and legends. Real historians use official databases and verified sources." Jake finally looked at the arrogant prince. "Have you actually started your essay yet?" Zekthon laughed. "I finished it yesterday. 5 civilizations, standard analysis, proper conclusions, resource depletion, political corruption, technological stagnation, just like every other student will write." "What if that's wrong?" "Wrong. These are established facts, human, studied by scholars for thousands of years." Jake gathered his courage. What if all those scholars missed something because they were looking from inside the system? What could they possibly miss? Jake pulled out his notebook and read from his notes. Every fallen civilization followed the same pattern. They started as small, struggling groups that had to fight for everything. That made them strong and creative. But when they became successful, they stopped struggling. They avoided competition. They eliminated conflict. They tried to make everything safe and predictable. "That sounds like good government to me," Zekthon said. "But it made them weak. When real challenges came, they couldn't handle them anymore. They had forgotten how to adapt and change." Zekthon was quiet for a moment. "You think the current galactic government is weak?" "I think it's following the same pattern as all the others." The prince leaned forward. "That's treasonous talk, human. It's historical analysis. It's dangerous." Zekthon looked around the empty library. "The Federation has brought peace and prosperity to the galaxy. We've eliminated war, poverty, and suffering." "Have you?" Jake asked. "Or have you just hidden them?" "What do you mean?" Jake pulled out more notes. "The Federation hasn't fought a real war in over a century. Your military does peacekeeping missions and humanitarian aid. What happens when you face an enemy that actually wants to destroy you? That won't happen. We've evolved beyond such primitive conflicts." Every fallen civilization said the same thing. Zekthon stood up abruptly. "You're just a child from a backward planet. What could you possibly understand about galactic civilization?" After the prince left, Jake sat alone in the quiet library. His research was almost complete, and what he had found scared him. Every pattern, every interview, every historical comparison pointed to the same conclusion. The United Worlds Federation was exhibiting all the warning signs of a civilization in decline. They had eliminated competition between member worlds. They avoided conflicts even when action was necessary. They had created a massive bureaucracy that valued process over results. Their military hadn't faced a real threat in generations. Their citizens were comfortable and complacent. Jake thought about his grandmother's garden back on Earth. She had always said that plants needed some stress to grow strong. Too much water made them weak. Too much fertilizer made them soft. Plants that never faced wind or weather couldn't survive when storms came. Maybe civilizations were the same way. Jake opened his laptop and started writing. At the top of the page, he typed the title of his essay, "The Comfortable Death: How Success Becomes the Greatest Enemy of Survival." He didn't know that his words would soon shake the foundations of galactic government. Jake spent 2 weeks writing his essay. Every night after classes, he sat in his small dorm room and worked on his laptop. The words came slowly at first, then faster, as his ideas became clearer. He wrote about the Andromedan Empire and how they became so focused on making perfect art that they forgot how to solve everyday problems. When crop diseases destroyed their food supply, their artists couldn't figure out how to grow new plants. They were too specialized, too comfortable in their narrow roles. He described the Centauri Coalition and their obsession with technological efficiency. They built machines to handle every task, even thinking. When the machines broke down, the Centauri had lost the ability to fix problems by themselves. They had become helpless without their technology. Jake compared these ancient civilizations to the current United Worlds Federation. The parallels were frightening. The Federation had 17 different committees that had to approve any major decision. Military officers spent more time filing reports than training for combat. Scientists worked on safe, approved projects instead of taking risks that might lead to real breakthroughs. The most disturbing part was how the Federation dealt with conflict. Instead of solving problems, they avoided them. When member worlds disagreed, they set up mediation committees that talked for years without making decisions. When pirates attacked trade routes, they sent peacekeeping forces that tried to negotiate instead of fighting. Jake remembered what his grandmother had said about plants needing stress to grow strong. The Federation was like a garden where every plant was given perfect conditions. No wind, no storms, no challenges. The plants looked healthy, but they were actually weak and couldn't survive real hardship. In his essay, Jake argued that the Federation's greatest strength was also its greatest weakness. Peace and prosperity had made the galaxy soft. The elimination of competition had reduced innovation. The avoidance of conflict had left them unprepared for real threats. Jake wrote about Earth's history to show a different way. Humans had fought constantly throughout their development. Wars were terrible, but they also drove technological advancement and social change. Competition between nations led to space exploration, medical breakthroughs, and rapid development. Human civilization grew strong because we never eliminated struggle, Jake wrote. We learned to adapt because we had to. We developed creativity because comfortable solutions didn't exist. We became resilient because comfortable was never an option. The essay was harsh but fair. Jake didn't attack the Federation's goals of peace and prosperity. Instead, he questioned their methods. Was it possible to maintain strength while avoiding all conflict? Could a civilization stay innovative without competition? Did safety and comfort eventually become forms of weakness? Jake's most controversial argument came in the final section. He suggested that humans, despite being the newest members of galactic society, might actually be stronger than the older civilizations. Not because they were superior, but because they hadn't yet learned to avoid all difficulties. Every successful galactic civilization has followed the same path, he wrote. They start small and struggling, which makes them strong and creative. They achieve success through adaptation and innovation, but then they try to preserve that success by eliminating the very forces that created it. They remove competition, avoid conflict, and seek comfort above all else. This creates a slow decline that looks like continued success until it's too late to reverse. Jake concluded his essay with a warning. The United Worlds Federation is currently at the peak of its power and influence, but all the warning signs of civilizational decline are present. The question is not whether the Federation will fall, but whether it will recognize the danger in time to change course. The essay was exactly 12,147 words. Jake read through it 3 times, checking for errors and making sure his arguments were clear. Each time he read it, he became more convinced that his conclusions were correct, but he also became more worried about what would happen when he submitted it. On the day the assignment was due, Jake uploaded his essay to the class database. Professor Wei Zelthak would read all the submissions over the weekend and return them with grades the following week. Jake's classmates submitted their essays too. Zekthan turned in his analysis of resource depletion and political corruption. Shard of Infinite Thought wrote about technological stagnation and social decay. Crush of Mountains examined economic factors and trade disruptions. All the other essays followed the same pattern. They analyzed the approved causes of civilizational collapse and drew safe conclusions that wouldn't upset anyone. They were well written, thoroughly researched, and completely predictable. Jake's essay was different. It asked uncomfortable questions and suggested dangerous answers. It challenged the basic assumptions that galactic society was built on. It implied that the current government might be making fatal mistakes. After submitting his essay, Jake couldn't concentrate on his other classes. He kept thinking about Professor Zelthak's reaction. Would the professor be angry? Would Jake get in trouble for criticizing the Federation? Would they send him back to Earth? That evening, Jake video called his grandmother. He told her about his essay and his worries about the consequences. "Did you write what you believe to be true?" Betty asked. "Yes." "Did you support your arguments with evidence?" "Yes." "Did you consider other viewpoints fairly?" "I tried to." Betty smiled. "Then you did your job as a historian. Sometimes the truth makes people uncomfortable, but that doesn't make it less true." "What if I'm wrong? What if the Federation really has found a better way? Then your essay will start a discussion that proves you wrong. That's how knowledge advances, Jake. Someone asks a difficult question, and smart people work together to find the answer." Jake felt a little better after talking to his grandmother, but he still couldn't shake the feeling that his essay was going to cause more trouble than he had intended. He didn't know how right he was. At that moment, Professor Zelthak was in his office, reading Jake's essay for the second time. The insect-like, alien's compound eyes were fixed on the screen, and his antennae were twitching with agitation. The professor had been teaching galactic history for over 2 centuries. He had read thousands of student essays on civilizational collapse. Most of them said exactly what he expected them to say. Jake's essay was different. It was brilliant, terrifying, and possibly treasonous. But most disturbing of all, Professor Zelthak was beginning to think that the human student might be right. Professor Zelthak sat in his dark office long after the 2 suns of Kepler-7 had set. Jake's essay glowed on his computer screen. He had read it 4 times now, and each reading made him more uncomfortable. For 200 years, he had taught the standard explanations for why civilizations fell: resource problems, political corruption, technological failures. Simple answers that students could memorize and repeat. But this human child had found patterns that Zelthak had never noticed. The professor's mandibles clicked nervously as he reread Jake's conclusion. The boy was suggesting that the Federation itself was in danger, that everything they had built over the last 1,000 years might be following the path to destruction. Zelthak wanted to dismiss the essay as the wild theories of an inexperienced student, but he couldn't. Jake's research was thorough, his logic was sound, and his evidence was compelling. Worse, the essay explained things that had been bothering Zelthak for years. Why did Federation military exercises always end in negotiated settlements? Why did their scientists avoid risky research projects? Why did every government decision take months of committee meetings? Jake's essay suggested these weren't signs of wisdom and maturity. They were symptoms of decline. The professor tried to assign the essay a low grade. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, ready to type C- or D+. But his academic conscience wouldn't let him do it. The essay was brilliant work, even if its conclusions were dangerous. Finally, Zelthak gave the essay an A and added, "A note, see me immediately after class tomorrow." The next morning, Jake sat nervously in advanced galactic history class. Professor Zelthak returned the graded essays to each student. When Jake received his paper, he was shocked to see the A at the top, but the professor's note made his stomach tighten with worry. After class, Jake approached the professor's desk. Zelthak's 4 compound eyes studied the young human carefully. "Your essay raises disturbing questions, Mr. Morrison. I'm sorry if I wrote something wrong, Professor." "You didn't write anything wrong. That's the problem." Zelthak clicked his mandibles. "Your analysis is academically sound and thoroughly researched, but your conclusions could be considered dangerous to galactic stability." Jake swallowed hard. "Are you going to report me?" "Report you for what? Writing an excellent essay?" The professor's antennae twitched. "No, Mr. Morrison. But I am going to share your work with some colleagues. They need to see what you've discovered." Word about Jake's essay spread quickly through the Institute's faculty. Dr. Lisa Parker was the first person Professor Zelthak contacted. She read the essay in her office, growing more amazed and worried with each page. "My God," she whispered when she finished. "Jake has identified something that we've all been too close to see." Dr. Parker immediately sent a copy to Admiral Rex Cooper, the senior military attaché from Earth. Cooper was visiting the Institute as part of a routine diplomatic mission, but he had always been interested in strategic analysis. Admiral Cooper read the essay that night in his quarters aboard the Federation cruiser Meridian. As a military officer, he had often been frustrated by the Federation's approach to conflict resolution. Their rules of engagement were so restrictive that battles often ended before they began. Cooper had commanded human forces in 3 different peacekeeping missions. Each time, he had watched Federation commanders make decisions that prioritized avoiding casualties over achieving objectives. Jake's essay explained why. The Federation had become so afraid of conflict that they had forgotten how to win when conflict was necessary. The Admiral sent an encrypted message to Fleet Command on Earth. "Urgent. Student essay identifies critical strategic vulnerabilities in Federation military doctrine. Recommend immediate review by senior staff." Meanwhile, other copies of Jake's essay were circulating through different channels. Dr. Parker shared it with her contacts in the Human Diplomatic Corps. Professor Zelthak discussed it with other history faculty members. Admiral Cooper mentioned it to fellow military officers. Each person who read the essay had the same reaction. First shock, then recognition, then a growing sense of alarm. Jake had identified something that everyone had sensed, but no one had been willing to say out loud. 3 days after Jake submitted his essay, Dr. Parker called him to her office. "Jake, we need to talk about your assignment." Jake sat down nervously. "Did I do something wrong?" "No, you did something right. Maybe too right." Dr. Parker looked worried. "Your essay is being read by some very important people in the Federation government and military leadership. Is that bad?" "It's complicated. Your ideas are spreading faster than we expected. Some people are very interested in what you've discovered. Others are very upset." Jake felt a chill. "What do you
mean upset?"
"Some Federation officials think your essay is an attack on galactic civilization. They're calling it dangerous propaganda that could destabilize society." I was just answering the assignment question. "I know. But sometimes the truth is more dangerous than lies." Dr. Parker leaned forward. "Jake, I need you to be very careful. Don't discuss your essay with other students. Don't post anything about it on the communication networks. And don't leave the Institute grounds without telling me first." That evening, Jake tried to video call his grandmother, but the connection failed. He tried again several times with the same result. Finally, a message appeared on his screen. "Communication temporarily restricted for security reasons." Jake's hands shook as he read the message. His essay had somehow become a security issue. A simple school assignment had turned into something much bigger and more dangerous than he had ever imagined. The next morning, Jake noticed that other students were treating him differently. Some stared at him with curiosity. Others whispered when he walked by. Prince Zekthan glared at him with open hostility. During lunch, Crush of Mountains approached Jake's table. The massive rock-like alien sat down carefully, making the floor vibrate. "Human Jake," the alien rumbled in his deep voice. "I have read your essay." Jake tensed. "How did you get a copy?" "It is spreading through the networks. Many beings are reading it now." Crush of Mountains was quiet for a moment. "Your words are causing great discussion on my homeworld. The Council of Stones is debating your ideas about Federation weakness. I didn't mean to cause problems. You have not caused problems, Human Jake. You have revealed problems that already existed." The alien's rocky face showed something that might have been a smile. Sometimes it takes an outsider to see what those inside cannot. That afternoon, Jake was called to the office of Dean Vorthak, the Institute's administrator. The tall, blue-skinned alien looked stern behind his massive desk. "Mr. Morrison, your recent academic work has attracted considerable attention." "Yes, sir. Some of this attention is unwelcome. I have received complaints from Federation officials about your essay's content." Jake's heart pounded. "Am I in trouble?" "Not yet. But I must ask you to avoid any further public discussion of your theories. The Institute values academic freedom, but we also have a responsibility to maintain good relations with the Federation government." Jake left the dean's office feeling scared and confused. His simple history essay had somehow become a threat to galactic stability. He didn't understand how asking questions about the past could be so dangerous in the present. What Jake didn't know was that his essay had already reached the highest levels of Federation government. At that very moment, Chancellor Vexthar was reading it in his office on the capital world of Centauri Prime, and his reaction would determine Jake's future. Chancellor Vexthar of the United Worlds Federation read Jake's essay 3 times before calling an emergency meeting. The tall, silver-skinned leader had governed the galaxy for 30 years. He prided himself on maintaining peace and stability across thousands of worlds. But this human child's essay made him question everything. The emergency session of the Federation Council convened 2 days later. Representatives from hundreds of worlds gathered in the Great Chamber on Centauri Prime. Chancellor Vexthar stood at the central podium, holding a copy of Jake's essay. "Fellow representatives," he began, "we face an unusual situation. A student essay has raised questions about our government's effectiveness and our civilization's future." Murmurs filled the chamber. Many representatives had already read Jake's work. Others were hearing about it for the first time. Senator Maya Brooks from Earth stood up. She was a tough woman in her 50s who had often felt frustrated by the Federation's slow decision-making process. "Chancellor, I request permission to read portions of this essay to the full council." Permission granted, Senator Brooks. Maya opened her tablet and began reading Jake's words about civilizational decline and the Federation's dangerous patterns. Her voice carried clearly through the chamber as she described how successful societies often eliminated the very forces that made them strong. "The essay concludes," Maya said, "that the Federation is showing all the warning signs of a civilization in decline. We avoid conflict, eliminate competition, and prioritize comfort over growth. According to this analysis, we are following the same path as every fallen galactic empire in history." The chamber erupted in angry voices. Some representatives shouted that the essay was treasonous. Others demanded to know why a human child was allowed to make such accusations. A few called for Jake's immediate arrest. Chancellor Vexthar raised his hand for silence. "The essay raises legitimate questions that deserve serious consideration. I am ordering a full governmental review to examine our current policies and procedures." "This is outrageous," shouted Representative Klexton from Vorthak Prime, Prince Eur Zekthan's father. "We're going to restructure our government because a teenage human wrote a school report. We're going to examine whether that teenage human identified real problems that we've been ignoring," Senator Brooks replied firmly. The argument continued for hours. Finally, Chancellor Vexthar called for a vote. By a narrow margin, the Council approved a comprehensive review of Federation policies, military readiness, and governmental efficiency. Meanwhile, Jake sat in his dorm room, unaware that his essay had triggered the biggest political crisis in Federation history. Dr. Parker had arranged for Agent Tom Swift to guard Jake after receiving threats from angry citizens who blamed the human student for attacking their way of life. Tom was a young security officer from Earth's diplomatic corps. He tried to keep Jake's spirits up while explaining the seriousness of the situation. "Some people think you're a hero," Tom said. "Others think you're a dangerous troublemaker. Either way, you're famous across the galaxy. I just wanted to get a good grade on my history assignment," Jake said miserably. Sometimes asking the right questions is more important than getting the right grade. 3 weeks later, the Federation's review committee released its preliminary findings. The results were shocking. Jake's essay had identified real weaknesses in almost every area of government and military operations. The Federation military had not conducted a realistic combat exercise in over 50 years. Their weapons technology lagged behind what some private corporations had developed. Most officers had never experienced actual combat and relied entirely on theoretical knowledge. The government bureaucracy had grown so complex that simple decisions required approval from dozens of different departments. Emergency responses were delayed for weeks while committees debated proper procedures. Innovation had slowed to almost nothing because new ideas were considered too risky to pursue. The economic system had become dependent on the comfort and stability that Jake had warned against. Most member worlds produced only specialized goods and relied on trade for everything else. If that trade was disrupted, many worlds would face immediate shortages of basic necessities. Admiral Cooper was appointed to lead military reforms. His first action was to schedule real combat training exercises for all Federation forces. Many officers complained that such training was too dangerous and unnecessary. "That attitude," Admiral Cooper announced, "is exactly why we need this training. An enemy won't care about our safety protocols." The political reforms were harder to implement. Senators and representatives had grown comfortable with the slow, committee-based decision-making process. They resisted changes that would make government faster and more efficient. Senator Brooks led the reform effort in the Council. She faced constant opposition from representatives who benefited from the current system's delays and complications. "Change is never comfortable," she told her opponents. "But as a human student taught us, comfort can be the enemy of survival." Jake watched the galactic news reports with amazement and growing worry. His essay had started something much bigger than he had ever intended. Some worlds were embracing the reforms and preparing for a more competitive future. Others were resisting change and blaming Jake for disrupting their peaceful society. Death threats arrived daily at the Institute. Some beings called Jake a prophet who had saved galactic civilization. Others wanted him executed as a traitor who had destroyed their way of life. After 2 months of chaos, Dean Vorthak decided to send Jake back to Earth for his own safety. "The Institute values academic freedom," the dean explained, "but we cannot guarantee your protection if you remain here." Jake packed his few belongings sadly. He had hoped to complete his education at the galaxy's most prestigious school. Instead, he was being sent home in disgrace. On his last night at the Institute, Professor Zelthak visited Jake's dorm room. "I wanted to thank you before you leave," the insect-like professor said. "Thank me? I've caused nothing but trouble." "You've caused people to think. That's what education is supposed to do." Zelthak's compound eyes gleamed. "Your essay will be studied for generations. It may have saved our civilization from the fate of all the others. What if I was wrong? What if the Federation really had found a better way? Then the reforms will prove you wrong, and we'll learn something valuable. But I suspect you were more right than wrong." Jake returned to Earth to find himself famous there too. His grandmother Betty met him at the spaceport, smiling proudly despite the crowd of reporters and protesters. "How does it feel to be the most famous teenager in the galaxy?" she asked as they drove home. "Scary," Jake admitted. "I just answered a history question. You did more than that. You asked whether we're repeating the mistakes of the past. Betty parked in front of their small house. That's the most important question any historian can ask. 6 months later, Jake was working in his grandmother's garden when the news broke. The Federation had successfully defended against the first major military threat in over a century. Pirates from outside the galaxy had attacked 3 border worlds, expecting easy victories against the Federation's peacekeeping forces. Instead, they faced Admiral Cooper's newly trained combat units. The Federation forces won decisive victories, in all 3 battles showing strength that surprised both enemies and allies. Jake smiled as he pulled weeds from between the tomato plants. His grandmother had been right about plants needing stress to grow strong. Maybe civilizations were the same way. The galaxy was changing, becoming more competitive and less comfortable. Some people weren't happy about it. But Jake hoped that the changes would make galactic civilization stronger and better prepared for whatever challenges lay ahead. He had learned that sometimes the most important job a historian could do was not to record the past, but to help prevent it from repeating in dangerous ways.